When I bought my house 3 years ago, I didn't think I was signing up for a guest appearance on HOA's Gone Wild. Sure, I'd heard the horror stories about overzealous neighborhood associations who thought they were the Supreme Court of shrubbery, but I was confident I wouldn't have to deal with any of that nonsense. Why? Because the previous owner of my house had opted out of the HOA. Legally. In writing. Signed, sealed, and notarized. And for 3 glorious years, I enjoyed the fruits of my HOA-free existence. My pool became my sanctuary, a sparkling oasis of chlorinated freedom in a sea of suburban conformity. No one could tell me what color to paint my shutters, how long my grass could grow, or whether my trash cans were allowed to breathe the fresh air for more than 12 hours at a time. Life was good, until the letter arrived. It came in one of those overly official envelopes that scream, "We're here to ruin your day." The return address belonged to the HOA office, or, as I now call it, the House of Absurdity. Intrigued and mildly irritated, I opened it and read the following. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that your pool does not comply with HOA regulations. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from using your pool until the following issues are resolved. Installation of an HOA-approved safety fence. Submission of pool usage schedules for review and approval. Failure to comply will result in fines of $50 per day. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, HOA President. I stared at the letter, blinking like I'd just been slapped with a wet pool noodle. Submission of pool usage schedules? HOA-approved safety fence? Fines? Fines? For a moment, I thought maybe I'd slipped into an alternate universe where Karen Whitmore ruled as some kind of chlorine-hating dictator. But no, this was real life, and Karen was clearly on a power trip. The best part? The HOA had no legal authority over my property. None. Zero. Zilch. My house was a glorious island of independence in a neighborhood shackled by HOA tyranny, and I intended to keep it that way. I picked up my phone and called the HOA office, fully prepared to squash this nonsense with a single conversation. Unfortunately, what I got instead was Karen 2.0, also known as Karen Whitmore herself. This is Karen Whitmore, HOA President, she answered. Her tone as crisp as freshly starched khakis. How can I help you? Hi, Karen. This is Alex Taylor, and I just got your letter about my pool. I think there's been a mistake because my property isn't part of the HOA. There was a pause, followed by the unmistakable sound of Karen pursing her lips. Actually, your property is part of the HOA. Our records show. No, it isn't, I interrupted, keeping my tone as polite as possible. The previous owner opted out. It's all in the deed. Well, our records must be outdated, Karen said, her voice tightening. Regardless, the HOA has jurisdiction over all properties within the neighborhood boundaries. And we've received complaints about your pool. Complaints? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. From who? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information, she replied. But as HOA president, it's my duty to ensure the safety and harmony of our community. Your pool is a liability. At this point, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. Liability? The only thing my pool was a liability to was my electric bill. Karen, I'm going to make this really simple, I said, leaning against my kitchen counter. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over my property. If you want to discuss this further, I suggest you talk to my lawyer. There's no need to involve lawyers, she snapped. We can resolve this amicably. Just install the safety fence and submit your pool usage schedule, and everything will be fine. Yeah, that's not happening, I said. Have a nice day, Karen. And with that, I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought wrong. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters from the HOA, each more aggressive than the last. The fines had started rolling in, $50 a day, as promised, and Karen had apparently decided to escalate her campaign of ridiculousness. One morning, I woke up to find a bright yellow sign staked into my front yard. Warning: non-compliant property. This property is in violation of HOA regulations. Residents are advised to avoid this location until compliance is achieved. It was so absurd I actually laughed. But then I noticed something else. A pair of strangers in HOA logo polo shirts standing by my pool, clipboards in hand. "Hey!" I shouted, storming out the back door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of them, a wiry guy with a mustache that screamed, "I'm in charge here," looked up and said, "Routine inspection. HOA policy. Get off my property before I call the cops," I said, crossing my arms. "You're trespassing. We have the right to inspect all properties within the HOA boundaries," Mustache Man said, puffing out his chest. "It's in the covenants. For the last time, my property isn't part of the HOA," I snapped. "Now leave, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Mustache Man hesitated, but his companion, a younger guy who clearly didn't get paid enough for this, grabbed his arm and muttered, "Let's just go." They left, but the damage was done. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to back down. If anything, she was just getting started. But so was I. After Karen's latest stunt, it was clear I needed to stop playing defense and start going on the offensive. The HOA might think they had the upper hand, but they were about to learn that messing with my property was the worst decision they'd made since mandating beige for all front doors. The first step in my counterattack? A deep dive into the legal and historical records of my property and the HOA. Lucky for me, the county courthouse keeps excellent digital records, and even luckier, I had a few hours to spare on a rainy Saturday. Armed with caffeine and a healthy dose of righteous indignation, I started my search. The great HOA paper trail. It didn't take long to find the goldmine I was looking for. My property's deed was clear as day. The previous owner had officially opted out of the HOA at the time of purchase, citing the lack of enforceable covenants. The opt-out was signed by both the seller and the HOA's then president, not Karen, obviously, and it explicitly stated that the property was exempt from all HOA rules, regulations, and fees. Beautiful. But I didn't stop there. If Karen was going to play dirty, I was prepared to outdig her. A few more hours of scrolling revealed some very interesting tidbits about the HOA itself, including financial discrepancies in their publicly filed budgets and complaints from other homeowners about Karen's heavy-handed tactics. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she targeted with her clipboard dictatorship. With a stack of documents in hand and a folder full of bookmarked pages, I was ready to fight fire with fire. But I needed an audience. Enter my neighbors. I'd always been friendly with my immediate neighbors, but I'd never had much reason to get involved in the wider community. That changed when I started knocking on doors. To my surprise, many of my neighbors were all too eager to share their own HOA horror stories. One family told me how Karen had fined them $200 for leaving their garden hose uncoiled. Another neighbor said she'd been harassed about the color of her curtains visible only from inside her home. It was clear Karen's reign of terror extended far beyond my pool, and people were fed up. By the time I finished making my rounds, I had a small but determined group of allies willing to back me up at the next HOA meeting. More importantly, I had stories to share, and Karen wasn't going to like them. The day of the meeting, I walked into the community center armed with my documents, my neighbors, and a very large coffee. Karen was already there, seated at the head of the table like some kind of suburban empress, flanked by her loyal minions. The room was packed, with most of the neighborhood in attendance, a rarity, I was told, since these meetings were usually as exciting as watching paint dry. Karen started the meeting with her usual spiel about community standards and preserving property values, but I didn't give her a chance to launch into her pool propaganda. The moment she opened the floor for comments, I stood up. "Hi, Alex Taylor here," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "I'm here to address the HOA's recent attempts to fine me and restrict my use of my own property." Karen's smile tightened, but she gestured for me to continue. "Go ahead, Alex. Let's hear it." "Thank you," I said, holding up the deed to my house. "First, let's get one thing straight. My property is not part of the HOA. It never has been, and it never will be. Here's the proof, signed and notarized by the HOA's own leadership." I walked to the front of the room and handed her a copy. The color drained from her face as she read it, but I wasn't done. "Second, I continued, the HOA's trespassing on my property was not only inappropriate, it was illegal. If it happens again, I'll have no choice but to file charges. And third, I've taken the liberty of reviewing the HOA's financial records and I found some interesting discrepancies. Perhaps you'd like to explain these, Karen? The room erupted into murmurs. Karen sputtered, trying to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. My neighbors, bolstered by their own grievances, started piling on, sharing their stories of Karen's overreach and demanding accountability. By the end of the meeting, Karen looked like she'd been hit by a freight train of homeowner outrage. A motion was made to review her leadership and audit the HOA's finances, and to my delight, it passed unanimously. For the first time since moving in, I felt like the neighborhood was finally standing up to her nonsense. As for me, I walked out of that meeting with my head held high and my pool rights fully intact. Karen hasn't sent me another letter since, and the yellow warning sign mysteriously disappeared from my yard the next day. After the HOA meeting, the neighborhood entered a state of uneasy peace. Karen's reign of terror was officially over, or at least significantly weakened, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. People like Karen don't give up power so easily, and I had a feeling she was already plotting her next move. In the meantime, I decided to make the most of my victory. I threw a pool party. To be clear, this wasn't just any pool party. This was a full-blown celebration of freedom, complete with tiki torches, a DIY margarita bar, and a giant inflatable flamingo that I named Karen 2.0. I invited everyone in the neighborhood, even the ones who still thought the HOA was a good idea. To my surprise, nearly everyone showed up. The party was a hit. Kids splashed in the pool. Adults mingled over drinks, and the playlist was a perfect mix of summer hits and ironic anthems like, "We're Not Gonna Take It." For one glorious afternoon, it felt like the neighborhood had finally come together, free from the petty tyranny of HOA nonsense. But as the sun set and the party wound down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done yet. Sure enough, my suspicions were confirmed a few days later when a new letter arrived in my mailbox. Dear Mr. Taylor, while the HOA respects the outcome of our recent meeting, we believe there are still unresolved issues regarding your property. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss these matters further at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore. I sighed, crumpling the letter in my hand. It seemed the battle wasn't over yet. But if Karen thought she could wear me down, she had another thing coming. This was my home, my pool, and my fight, and I wasn't backing down. Karen's latest letter was the equivalent of a white flag dipped in passive aggression. She wasn't ready to give up, but the stakes were clearly shifting. This time, she wanted to meet amicably. That was a new one. Of course, I wasn't naive enough to fall for her olive branch. If anything, it was time to escalate. My goal was simple. End her power trip once and for all, ensuring she couldn't pull this nonsense on anyone else. Before replying to Karen, I reached out to the neighbors who'd backed me up at the meeting. I wanted them to be ready for whatever Karen was planning. Most were eager to help, though a few admitted they were just happy to see someone else taking the lead for once. Fair enough. Next, I consulted a lawyer. It wasn't the first time I'd had legal advice during this HOA fiasco, but now I wanted a definitive, on-paper analysis of everything. The opt-out clause, Karen's overreach, the trespassing incidents / U 2014, I wanted it all wrapped in legalese and stamped with authority. Finally, I decided to accept Karen's offer to meet, but on my terms. We agreed to meet at my house. I wasn't about to set foot in the HOA's lair and give her home field advantage. When she arrived, clipboard in hand and a tight-lipped smile on her face, I was already seated by the pool, a pitcher of lemonade between us. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Karen began, sitting down. I believe we can work this out. Save it, I interrupted. We both know why you're here. Let's cut to the chase. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting my bluntness. All right, Alex, let's talk about your pool. It's causing concerns in the community. Concerns? Or just you? I asked. She stiffened. It's not personal. It's about ensuring everyone follows the same rules. I couldn't help but laugh. Rules? Karen, my property isn't part of the HOA. It never has been. And yet you've trespassed, harassed, and tried to fine me for rules that don't apply. Care to explain how that's not personal? Her smile faltered. I'm acting in the best interest of the community. Then you won't mind if I share a few things with the community. I reached for my folder, pulling out copies of the deed, the opt-out agreement, and my lawyer's analysis. I handed them to her one by one. This proves my property isn't part of the HOA, I said, tapping the deed. This confirms the HOA has no jurisdiction here. I slid the lawyer's statement across the table. And this details every instance of overreach, trespass, and misuse of HOA funds under your leadership. I've already shared it with my lawyer and the neighbors. Karen's face turned a delightful shade of red. You're blowing this out of proportion, she stammered. Am I? Because next time you trespass, I'll file charges. Next time you send a fine, I'll sue for harassment. And if this nonsense continues, I'll make sure the HOA gets a full audit and a new president. Karen stood abruptly, her clipboard clutched like a shield. This isn't over, she snapped. Oh, it is, I said, leaning back. You just don't know it yet. The fallout was immediate. Karen didn't show her face in the neighborhood for weeks. When she did, it was only to announce her resignation as HOA president, citing personal reasons. Rumor had it, the audit I'd suggested uncovered enough questionable spending to make her position untenable. As for the HOA, they backed off entirely. No more fines, no more trespassers, no more yellow warning signs. The neighbors even started talking about dissolving the association altogether, though that's a story for another time. For now, my pool remains a judgment-free zone, and I've got my neighborhood back. Last weekend, I threw another pool party. As I was floating on my flamingo, drink in hand, the neighbors brought over a new sign to show me, replacing the old one that hangs at the entrance to our neighborhood. Welcome to Sunnybrook Estates, a friendly, HOA-free community. Cheers to that.